Greetings. Welcome to Defacto Review, our weekly in-depth analysis on the current news and affairs with our commentator and economist, Mr. Jargal Defacto.
Good evening.
And I'm your host, Namsar Singh. You can join in on our conversation on the MNB World Facebook page and on Twitter with hashtag Jargal_Defacto. Now on to our topics for today. Will the government of Mongolia improve oil tolgoi agreement? Politics around social insurance tax increase. New leadership of Mongol Bank and Financial Regulatory Commission. Now let's get into our first topic. The Parliament unanimously approved a draft resolution aimed at protecting the rights and interests of Mongolian people in the exploitation of oil tolgoi deposit. The resolution has 8 articles to improve agreement regarding the oil tolgoi. Prior to this, there was an announcement that the municipality court invalidated the decision of the previous government about Dubai agreement. So our first question about this one is, does oil tolgoi agreement itself needs improvements?
Well, before we go this long topic, let me brief you shortly about what is this project about today. This project had started 2010, and every 5 years they renew the reserve. And currently today, this deposit oil tolgoi has totaled 32 or so million tons of copper, 1,200 tons of gold, and twice more silver. According to the Economic Research Institute of National University of Mongolia, this project, as a result of the project, the country had increased for the period 2009-2017, the export 3.2 times. And the physical copper had increased 2.5 times, and the price 3 times. The total volume in price 3 times. And 1/3 of Mongolian labor in mining sector are being trained by this project. Total some $27 million spent for that. And 55% of domestic flights are run on the route Ulaanbaatar Hambombut, which is the next airport to the project. And for water usage, water is a rare resource in Gobi. Just alone 2017, the company paid 15.4 billion tugriks. And the local development had reached a substantial level, 92 or so projects with more than $500 million spent for the local development projects. So in very brief, this with the development of Mongolia today is very hard to imagine without this project. Then what is the matter? What is this new decree about the contract? Well, there is a Parliament Decree number 40 since 2008 December, where the Mongolian government is to own 34%. And the next decree important of this parliament is 2009, where the government was given permission to sign the contract of OT with OT. Well, that's legally what is done so far. And what is the reason to change, to make amendments in this contract? I would group it into 4. First, the costs keep increasing. If when the project started 10 years ago, the initial investment estimated was 5.3 billion. Today it's 11.1 billion. Since Mongolia owns 34% of the project and its investment share, it is borrowed from Rio Tinto, and thus the increase of Mongolian debt to the level of $1.4 billion today. So that makes people very worried. First is the increase of costs. Second, management service fee was originally 6% of the total volume of sales, which is negotiated to 3%, which still Mongolia finds high. The third is we have Mongolian government and the OT have always tax disputes. At the times, it was talking about $3.2 billion irregularities in tax payment. The fourth is the pending power stations, electric power stations, which for electricity OTs paying some $130 million to China. So these four major groups of unsatisfaction from Mongolian side makes people think differently, and they are appealing to have changes in the contract that we have signed with the company.
So decree of the parliament says that it is to ensure the rights of Mongolia and Mongolian people. So were the Mongolian interests really damaged during this?
No, these four things are really getting Mongolia into deeper debt to Rio Tinto, to partner. And but however, on the other side, the contract is contract. Pacta sunt serventa, how it is said in Latin, on the one side. On the other side, the agreement was not the perfect one, and Mongolia, I think, even on two sides agreed to make amendments, but slowly. But not like at this time now, again, this election mood syndrome comes before the election, and to change it immediately, to stop the project, etc., as certain politicians appeal. But however, the parliament had discussed, by the way, long-awaited parliament working group, inspection working group, headed by MP Tirbish Tawag. And after 5 years of a lot visits, a lot long inspections, the parliament had agreed, and they have discussed this report of that working group, and finally came to the conclusion that given the conclusion that government should renegotiate with the Rio Tinto the OT agreement.
So there's a Dubai agreement. Can we understand that this was invalidated?
Which one?
The Dubai agreement?
Well, along with these government decisions, parliament decisions, there was, with a week or so difference, there was a decision by administrative court of Ulaanbaatar city. Mongolia has administrative court. The lowest level is the city level, Ulaanbaatar, and that this court had discussed the appeal of one NGO to annul this, not particularly the agreement, but to make illegal or annul the permission of the government, headed by Prime Minister Sayhan Bileg. That permission was given to two individuals, Mr. Biamp Sayhan, who was head of Erdnis Mongolia, and Mr. Rambold, who was the head of CEO of Erdnis Tolgoi. To both of them, they were given permission to sign an agreement of underground mine of OT, which had happened in Dubai. That's why the agreement has this name. However, it is not the Dubai agreement itself, but the permission of the government to sign this to these individuals. However, in a final form, that decisions of that arbitration court, administrative court decisions have not yet reached to the instance upper to the administrative court level. And there are a couple questions so far raised. One is, according to the administrative law, an entity that can appeal, or they can go to bring the sue, the decision, government decisions for public interests have certain requirements. So that's one thing, if whether this requirement was met or not. The second one is also, according to this administrative court, if the government decisions is a political decisions, it is not the subject to be considered by arbitration court. So let's see if these two requirements are met or not. Things will be clear when the decision in the written form will come out and translated. Then we will discuss about that final decisions.
Okay, thank you for that. Now let's get into our second topic. The social insurance tax will be increased by 1% yet again next year. People are outraged because social insurance system itself wasn't improved, but it has been increased steadily for the last 3 years. The Association of Small and Medium Enterprises and the Association of Mongolian Trade Union protested against this decision. The president of Mongolia said that he will veto this decision also. So our first question about this one is that the president is going to veto this decision. So is this right?
Well, that's at least the Chancellor of the President Office, Mr. Inkbold, announced it publicly that they will veto, the president will be veto this 2% increase. Well, what is happening is, up to now, recently we have 10% from our salary to pay for the social insurance by employee, by employer. But because this IMF conditions, which took out Mongolia from a very severe debt crisis 3 years ago, and they require to have not deficit in the social insurance, which taking the lion's share of the budget. So it is not necessarily saying that they increase that much is this much, but however, not to cover the deficit of social insurance in Mongolia, they keep increasing from 20 up to now 24%. Now valid percent is 12 on two sides, but now final one where we talk about the veto is increasing again by 1% on each side for 2020, which made the people very unhappy, in particular employers. And so that's what the president is going to veto. But it will be good if the president also explain that also by the following reason, because any increase in the tax, in particular social insurance, is involved in cutting the money that otherwise go to investment for extending of businesses, for creating new jobs, which is not happening. Now it is very expensive to employ somebody in Mongolia because of this and increasing that tax, and people are not creating new jobs. And by the way, the labor participation in Mongolia is only 50%. In other words, only half of the people of the working age working in Mongolia, and the rate is in Russia, for example, 60%, in China 85%. So that means 50% of those who is working are also paying, in this particular case, the pension for those 50 who is not working. So, and that makes people very bad incentives not to work. And it is at least unjust system where you pay your payment to the social insurance, and instead of getting the proper versions amount to yourself as a pension, you are sharing with those who is not working, is at least unjust. So that would be good if the president put that reason into the vetoing reasons. However, which is not the case so far, but people are opposing that increase, and most probably this will not go through. However, President veto in Mongolia can be override by parliament at their second discussions after veto, which usually happens.
So what is the main reason behind pension fund deficit, and how can we compensate for the losses without increasing the taxes? Is there any possibility?
The reason, two things. Mongolian government always spends more than they earn, and that's why always deficit. For social insurance in particular, for example, very bad management. According to Minister of Labor and Social Care, Mr. Chinzorik, when he became a minister 3 years ago, there was 280 billion tugriks. Remember, the deficit is 600 billion, but 280 billion tugriks were in the capital bank account as saving. According to him, he said that now, by the time the bank had bankrupt, it was only 100 billion tugriks. But still, 100 billion tugriks we lost with the bankruptcy of the bank. So how can the government, which is losing our money into bankrupt bank, and then now increasing the taxes from those people who are paying? It is, at least, it's not right. So that's why we need the proper management of the existing fund. Secondly, we need to introduce private pension fund that is kind of giving more time, relax for those who is working, because there are already private pension funds in Mongolia functioning now. And like many other the progressive countries, employer is matching the money that the employee pays to the private pension fund, so that it has more loyalty to the company. Because in case if the person is leaving the company, he cannot have access to that portion of the private pension fund which was paid by the company. So this is the two ways.
Okay, so people say that the social insurance system itself is really flawed, and you held a de facto debate about this issue. So could you give us your opinion about the current system?
Yes, last week we had another program called Defacto debate on national TV, which is broadcast all around the country. We had a guest that the minister I have mentioned, and also another professional who was against the minister discussing about the bad management of the fund. Well, you know, Mongolia is trying to do what the Russians tried and did not succeed. Mongolia is increasing now the pension age, but we have already a law which is valid from the beginning of this year. Every year from 2019, from this year and the next year as well, the pension age will be increased by 6 months, all the way to 2027, where the man is entitled to retire at 65 years old, a woman 60 years old. Whether it's the right decisions or not, but the argument from the government is saying that we have average longevity is increasing in Mongolia, so we can increase the. But however, the conditions of the people who are going to their pension is different. It's at the end, it's average. 69 is average, but somebody is dying before they are retired as well. So I think down the road this will have more resistance from the people, but it's after.
So would you tell us more about the difference in other countries and their social security system? Because does Mongolia have higher social insurance tax compared to other countries?
Well, by the level, the rate, maybe not the highest, but the way how they are losing because the bad management, the public money, is certainly highest. Any country there, if it is, they are losing $100 million for bankruptcy of a small bank, and that's the problem. So everything is relative. Mongolia, being a developing country with the average income of $4,000 per capita of GDP, we should be very prudent with this kind of money, which is unfortunately not the case for this government, the previous one, and I think every government since 2000. So Mongolian government is to be careful with the public money, public property. We should fight corruption that is leaking the money from our public funds and from our public property.
Okay, so let's get on to our third topic. Mongolia was grey-listed by the Financial Action Task Force, an intergovernmental organization against money laundering and terrorism financing. Because of this, leadership of the two of Mongolia's main financial institutions, Mongol Bank and Financial Regulatory Commission, were relieved of duty. A new leadership was recently appointed. Vice President of Mongol Bank, Thaugsurum, was appointed as the President of Mongol Bank, and the Deputy Chief of the Financial Regulatory Commission, Bairsahan, was appointed as the Chief of the Commission. So our first question is, Vice President of the Mongol Bank and the Deputy Chief of the Financial Regulatory Commission were appointed as the leaders of these institutions. Why such decisions were made?
Good question, because it raises immediately one question: what they have been doing it before. If they are now, if they are replacing the heads of these two institutions, very important two institutions, Bank of Mongolia and the FRC, and then these two persons were the deputies. So the question is coming: why they have been not doing what they are planning to do? The difference. looks like these two guys on the top before was preventing them to do so. So if they are there now, they are now there. If they don't do something different, and nothing is changing, the question is coming, why then these two people were released? So these two persons are in a quite hot spot now, and they to do something substantial to change, in particular to take out Mongolia from that grey list of money laundering. And it both has to do a lot of jobs, according to the report, very detailed report of AVTF. Mongolia is to really to make healthier the banking system, and that was, by the way, the awards by Minister of Finance when the Parliament was nominating the Deputy of Central Bank to this head. He said that we need to continue the reform of banking system, which is true. Which, by the way, there is a particular clause he has to pay attention whether he can do it or not. What makes him different than the previous one is there was a problem with increase of equity capital of commercial banks. They have increased. The previous guy signed, and then IMF said, no, we need a certificate or we need insurance of the independent party that this increase of equity capital was in the right way according to the best practice of the banking system. And they have checked. They got the right independent company. And then if certain irregularities, 3 or so bank of system size, which is if the bank total asset has more than 5% of the total banking asset, that's called system bank. And the 3 banks of that so-called system banks turned out they have increased equity capital, not in the way according to the Basel requirements or almost in cash. So now the new head of Mongol Bank is to face this problem. If those 3 banks have not increased according to the law, the equity capital, it should annulled, or it should be classified in different part of the balance sheet. And now they need to increase. They should be given certain time. If they cannot increase the equity capital, then they state to come and increase because we cannot afford failing these large banks. So that's what happened in Korea in 1998. So that's one job that's expected from the new governor of the central bank, of the regulatory commission. One of the requirements of the FATF lists requirement was Mongolia is not regulating properly non-bank financial sector, which is true. And Mongolia cannot control the flow of, for example, gold. If tax is increased to 5% as a royalty, 20 tons of gold is disappearing. If it is decreased 2.5, 20 tons of gold is coming to the state coffin. What is that? Where the rest of the gold is flowing out? So that clearly shows that we need to make more prudent actions in terms of controlling the money in and out. So that's the reason, that's the 2 things we expected from that 2 newly nominated heads of 2 important agencies.
So previous leadership was punished for the grey list. So was this justified? What about the other people who didn't do their job?
They were kind of, in that sense, in that particular sense of grey list, it was kind of, there was the kind of scapegoat. Though they have certain share of the why we are there, according to the Minister of Finance, the government central bank previous governor was not reporting annually all the time about what they were doing, central bank was doing against the money laundering. That's what he said during this nomination. So, Mongolia is listed not only because of these 2 systems, but also because non-responsibility of other organizations like anti-corruption agency, court system of the country, which is mostly serving the corrupt people rather than the people, because nobody is punished in this country for corruption. though it's so much rampant corruption perception is so high, and nobody's got the penalty, so that people are afraid of doing any any money laundering actions. So that was one of the reasons. So the responsibility of becoming grey listed to be shared by our court system mostly, because anti-corruption agency, for example, transfers up to 400 criminal cases, asking the procureur to send to court, and only 10% or less only go into the court, and out of them only 10% or a couple of cases has some court decisions. So Mongolian court system is not working as it is supposed to work.
So we clearly need more monitoring on finance institutions of Mongolia and to prevent money laundering, and especially. So what kind of monitoring should be made on these institutions, and who can do that?
Well, first of all, these two institutions and other court system, and there are so many pending criminal cases which we don't know even where there is. Certain very high-ranking former ex-officials were arrested, then they're released, including the head of the largest commercial bank, Trade and Development Bank, the owner, largest owner, I mean, the only owner. He was arrested in this one. Now nobody is asking where are they and what is happening to these guys and why were arrested if they haven't done anything. If they have done something criminal, then why they are released? So that's the open question to our court system. What we find so far is our politicians are so intervened with their own mutual corruptions that they are not able to make any decisions up against any corrupt case in the country. So people are rather tired with this kind of limbo situation of court system in Mongolia.
So what kind of monitoring should be made?
Well, mostly monitoring in democratic system is a matter of horizontal management, or people should be more involved. Our democratic systems, civic society, NGOs to work harder to mobilize the peoples. Now, people are angry, okay? They are at home angry. They are sitting on their sofa and getting angry. But at the same time, they are plundering our money for their own profit, for their own big cars, big houses, and yet Mongolia is watching. So it is a control of all Mongolian citizens enjoying that freedom we have to monitor the government we have elected. That's what is missing. So the state, we see, even cannot make proper audit for their own actions. Our state audit is something kind of rubber, so that we don't have actually this auditing and system. So we all need to do it. We all to work for monitoring the government we have elected.
So we monitor, and what kind of actions can we take?
Well, go and demonstrate. That's what we are not doing. And only a few people sometimes go out. And it is so our low participation in this monitoring the power. As a result, they are plundering our money. As a result, people are getting poor. People are losing their jobs. 1/3 of Mongolia is still in the under poverty line. And just half of the Mongolians work of the labor age. And then they are running away to Korea. So I don't know how long it will go, but it will go certainly until everybody understands and protests properly.
Okay, so unfortunately, that is all the time we had for today. We will see you next week with more topics.
Thank you very much for watching our program. We try to be independent, the voice of what's happening in Mongolia every Sunday, picking out 3 important events and trying to give you on time in the English the information. Of course, it is not a perfect job. We try. The most importantly, you should receive right information on time, immediately. So that's the whole function. Thank you very much for spending the Sunday night with us.
Have a nice evening. Goodbye.
One is the